Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The soybean checkoff. It works for everyone.
I keep reading about engineered corn, but I don't know what that means.
Spring water, purified water, what's the difference?
Is imported beef safe for my family?
Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. That's where Real Ag comes in. From plant to plant and from pasture to plate, Kyle Bauer and the Real Ag crew find the facts to help you sort the truth and help you understand Real Ag. Now here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
The first wild hogs were domesticated thousands of years ago, but a lot has changed since then. Pork is our topic today on Real Ag. Today we'll be talking about pork. Here are some terms you may hear. A hog usually refers to an individual animal from the swine family. Swine often refers to groups of hogs or pigs or the industry as a whole. A male is called a boar. A female hog that has had pigs is a sow. Within the industry, the word pig usually refers to an animal below 70 pounds. Pork is a common term for the meat of the hog. Hogs grow very quickly and are ready to breed after only 6 months. This makes them an extremely efficient source of food. This also means that the hog producer needs to constantly monitor their animal's progress.
Well, the pigs are usually born in what we call a farrowing barn, and that's where the sows are housed in a farrowing stall, and they are, of course, are litter-bearing animals, so they will have anywhere from 7 to 15 in a litter. We're hoping for about 12. That's a nice size to deal with. Usually a good bred sow can raise 12 pigs, and then they stay with their mother from birth, which I said was about 3 pounds, to like 3 weeks of age, and at that time we're hoping that they will weigh 14, 15 pounds, sometimes a little less, sometimes more, and then they move on to a nursery, which piglets will be grouped together, usually in pens of about 25 head each, for an 8-week nursery phase, where they'll go from that 15 pounds on up to 60, 70 pounds. And they're fed a specialty diet to help them get started, make that transition from milk to grain. And then we move them into a finisher barn, which is usually a little less environmentally controlled. It's oftentimes a curtain-sided building, so they have to deal a little bit more with Mother Nature. And they will go from that 65, 70 pounds on up to the market weight, and that's usually like a 16-week turn in there. So for 16 weeks they'll grow on up to 280 pounds, in which time they'll be ready for market. The pig from birth to market is about 5 months, so that's actually quite a change over time. It used to take about 8 months to get a pig to market, but we've got it down that we can get them from birth, which they weigh hopefully about 3 pounds at birth, to 280 pounds at market in 5 months' time. Hogs eat primarily a corn, soybean meal based diet. Usually it's ground corn, ground bean meal, and then there are other ingredients added, obviously minerals and vitamins that will help them grow and be efficient. Around the world, obviously people use the ingredients that are cheapest and most available to them, but by far and away a corn, soybean meal diet would be what pigs are primarily fed.
Once a hog is old enough, it's then taken to a facility and slaughtered for human consumption. This is called processing.
Well, when the finishing pigs reach 270 pounds on up to like 300 pounds is usually the target window that we're trying to deliver to the packer. Then they will put generally around 200 pigs, 200 finishing pigs on a semi-load to be delivered by appointment to a packing plant, and then they will be unloaded at the packing plant and usually driven into holding pens, and they have a pre-slaughter inspection there to make sure that everything is good to go in for slaughter. The pigs are, depending on the packing plant, different plants have different systems, but most commonly they're driven down on a packing line, and they're stunned. And then pigs are, most commonly they're scalded, and then after they're dead, of course, and then that dehairs them, and then they're hung up to be bled and skinned, and then the meat is processed depending on what the packing plant's wanting to do with it. If they're wholesaling carcasses, or if they're breaking the carcass down into major meat cuts for different markets. The USDA is responsible, just like they are in beef and other meat, chickens, and they have veterinarians that are on staff in the plants that inspect each carcass as it goes by on the line, and so they're responsible for making sure that the meat is healthy and the plant is running it in a way that's going to keep the meat from becoming contaminated in the process. They have a pre-slaughter inspection, and then they have other people that are inspecting as the animals come across the line.
Most hogs that are bred for human consumption spend their entire lives in indoor hog farms. This gives the farmers the ability to control their animals' environment.
Obviously, it's evolved over time. I mean, farmers used to just raise a few pigs for their own consumption, and so they just had them out in dirt lots, or they ran them with the cattle, and so they didn't have enough pigs to specialize. And then as it evolved and swine operations got larger, they found out that by controlling the environment, they could promote better growth with the pig, better feed efficiency, meaning that they didn't have to use as much feed just to stay warm or stay cool. They could use all that energy for growth if they controlled the environment for the pig. And you take away a lot of the things like sunburn and frostbite and predators and things like that, so that the pig doesn't have to focus on that, can just focus on eating and growing, which is what we want them to do. Pigs are, they're very social animals, but they also have a social hierarchy, similar to, chickens. We always say a pecking order. Well, pigs kind of have their own pecking order too. So when we move pigs into a finishing barn, for example, we try to keep them then in the same pens with the same pen mates, because they're familiar and they kind of have their social hierarchy already established. So if you mix them up, then they have a tendency to fight, because they have to reestablish that order. And it's the same with sows, and because of the nature of sows, and when we breed them and then they have a litter and then we have to take them back to the breeding barn, they keep getting remixed. So that's kind of why the industry's evolved to having individual stall housing for sows, because it minimizes the fighting. I mean, you're always going to have a stronger, top of the hierarchy boss sow, we'll call her, and she will, she'll fight for feed. She'll always get more than her share, and so she'll end up being overweight, versus the bottom end of the pecking order. She tends to be thin and get picked on, and so we lose those animals out of production. One of the advantages of confinement hog rearing is that we can control the environment for the pig, take out some of the harshness of Mother Nature, so to speak. And so in the summertime, we want to keep the pigs cool, because they will be more comfortable and they will fight less and they will eat more if they're kept cool and comfortable. So with our finishing pigs, we have misters that we do what we call evaporative cooling where we drip water, kind of like when you go to Disney World and it's a really hot day and they have you walk through these mister tunnels because it helps you cool off. And you know, they're no dummies. They know if people are not hot, they'll be happier and they'll probably buy more things. And so we do the same thing with pigs. We mist them and then we blow a fan across them to try to keep them comfortable, because we know that if they're comfortable, they're going to fight less and they're going to eat more. And so that's good for production. So then it's kind of the opposite in the wintertime. We need to make sure that they're kept warm. So we have an environmentally controlled barn where usually they're curtain-sided, and the pig's own body heat, especially in a finisher barn, the pig's own body heat generates the heat that heats the building, but we have to make sure we keep the moisture level down, because we're trying to keep the pigs warm, dry, and comfortable for the same reasons we're trying to keep them cool and comfortable in the summertime, because then they will fight less, they will be healthier, and they will eat more. Sometimes another thing in the wintertime, if we don't control that moisture and keep them dry, then too much moisture also promotes bacterial growth, and they'll be more likely to catch a cold, get pneumonia. And so we want to try to keep them healthy. Always a dilemma in the farrowing barn is you really have two populations, and they have two different needs. I mean, the sow, ideally, she would like to be at like 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the baby pig's ideal temperature is 90. So we want to try to accommodate both needs by keeping the sow cooler. We use things like cooling evaporative pads or cool drippers right on the sow to keep her cool, because she will be more comfortable, she will eat more, therefore produce more milk, which is good for the baby pigs. We try to do that for her, but we can't keep the room temperature steady at 60 to 70 degrees for the baby pig, because it's not warm enough for them. So we create what we call a microenvironment for the baby pig, usually by the use of a heat lamp. So on the side of the farrowing stall, we'll have a heat zone, and it doesn't take the pigs but the first day of their life to figure that out. They're drawn toward the heat, and they know, and they will go lay there when they're not nursing. That's where they will rest, because it's a good environment for them. And I realize that people from outside of the industry, you know, maybe have an idealistic view of pork production. They think it's either going to be like old McDonald's farm. The thing that we focus on a lot is making sure that the food is safe, that, you know, we're not putting any obstacles in the way, such as antibiotic residue or chemicals, or, you know, any other physical hazards in the feed. So we work really hard to work with the producers to ensure that they understand what the risks are and what steps that they can take to prevent them. And then the other is the animal welfare issue. And you know, we know that by giving the pigs an appropriate environment that is less stressful on them, that they're also going to perform better. So it really is in the farmer's best interest to promote good animal welfare. You know, we work hard with producers on that too, to develop environments that are good for the pig, conducive to pig growth, don't require antibiotic intervention because the pigs just aren't exposed to those things that might make them sick. So, you know, I think all in all, the modern producer is very aware of those aspects, and they work really hard to provide a good, wholesome product.
Almost all improvement in the swine industry has come from breeding hogs that exhibit desirable traits. Now modern technology makes that process easier.
Yeah, pork has really, you know, if you, pork from 20 and certainly 50 years ago, I mean, was a lot fatter. You know, you look at the pictures of pigs from 50 years ago, and it's a lot different carcass than what you're seeing today. I mean, you're going from an inch and a half to an inch of back fat over the pork chop to, you know, less than a half an inch now. They're very, very lean. Genetic selection has, you know, taken on some new meaning in pork, because we can, if we find pigs that have desirable traits, sometimes we can look for genetic markers in those pigs, and if we find one, we can develop a genetic test and select specifically for, or sometimes against. Maybe it's something that's undesirable, and we select against that. So it would be intense genetic selection with the ability to use modern science technology to test using a simple blood test on pigs to select. One example would be a genetics company found in the female line of pigs there was what they called the estrogen receptor gene, which allowed her to have relatively large litter size. And so they developed a test for that, and then they could go through and select only females that had the estrogen receptor gene, because they knew that she would be more likely to have large litter size. And over time it proved that that was true. She generally had over one more pig per litter than those that didn't have that receptor gene. So, I mean, it's genetic selection, not necessarily genetic modification, but we're using our modern technology to choose animals that are going to work best in our system. There are purebred lines too, and they're really doing the same things, but they're just trying to keep it within, within one line of pig.
Sick animals are a frightening prospect, both for the consumer and for farmers. Therefore, most hog facilities thoroughly invest in biosecurity. These techniques are used to keep diseases from even entering a farm, greatly contributing to healthier animals and safer food.
I think people that aren't familiar with the hog industry have no idea of the level of biosecurity that surrounds a pig farm, because pigs are susceptible to diseases that can be transmitted from other pigs. They're susceptible to diseases that just can be transmitted through the air, if you have another pig farm in the vicinity, and also people. We can transmit diseases to pigs inadvertently, either by being at another pig farm or just viruses and things that we carry ourselves. So there's a lot of biosecurity that goes on with modern pig production. We call it shower in, shower out, and what that means is when I arrive at the pig farm in my street clothes, then I'm required to go into the locker room, take a shower, and put clothes on that stay at the farm, usually a pair of coveralls or something. And then when we're done, those boots and coveralls stay there. They have laundry facilities right on the farm, so there's some advantage to that. You never have to take your dirty, stinky clothes home. You can wash them right there, and then put the clothes on that you came in when you leave. And that's all just done as a disease prevention method. It's a biosecurity stopping point so that we don't inadvertently drag in bacteria or viruses that particular pig herd may not have been exposed to. So we don't want to make them sick. Well, waste is always an issue on the pig farms, but actually now that fertilizer cost has become so expensive, we don't even hardly call it waste anymore. We call it nutrient management because it has a lot of value, because it can replace chemical fertilizer, which has become just a big cost to the crop producer. So with pigs, there's several different systems, but probably the most common is where pigs will be kept on a slatted floor, and the waste, which would include the manure, the urine, and any water waste from when they drinking out of the water and they don't drink it all of that, and wash water from washing the facility down in between groups. All of that is collected in a pit underneath the barn. Now sometimes it's held in a deep pit and then pumped out of there into a honey wagon, which is a wagon that can hold the waste to be transported out onto the field where it will be applied for fertilizer. Or some farms have shallower pits with what we call pull plugs, and then we pull the plug and it drains out into a basin. It's a clay-lined basin called a lagoon, and then that holds all the manure, the wastewater, everything, until we pump it out of there. And there's multiple ways to do that, but the waste is, really utilized. It's, recycled. We use it back as fertilizer. KDHE, that's Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and just as the name implies, they regulate the environment. So that's, the waste management coming out of the farms, and that's also the air quality. I mean, if there's any air quality, and the carcass disposal for dead animals, they monitor all of that. Then we have the USDA, which monitors the actual meat product. I mean, they're charged with food safety, so they would be inspecting the meat as it enters into a processing plant and all the way through to when it's sold to the consumer in the grocery store. We also have the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration, and they would monitor any antibiotics, any kind of medications that we would use for keeping pigs healthy. Yeah, when we look at biosecurity of a farm, obviously the number one risk is pigs. So if we're introducing new pigs into the herd, like new genetic stock, we usually put them in an isolation facility, and we keep them there, and we usually test them for diseases that the herd they're going into knows that they don't have. And so we'll test them to make sure they're not bringing in any diseases that we don't want through that. So that would be, the number one concern. Probably number two is transport. We don't want a truck that has hauled pigs to a slaughter market to pull into the farm dirty. So the transport trucks are clean, disinfected, and dried before they come on the farm. And then sometimes even if we're worried about the risk, or let's say we have several producers that are going to haul together to make one load, we usually have an off-site loading area, because you wouldn't want a truck to drive into your facility that already had pigs on it. So you would have an off-site loading area. You would bring the pigs to them, just to try to reduce any risk of disease transfer. And then thirdly would be people, because we can accidentally transmit it just by being at other pig farms, or by harboring those respiratory viruses in our own respiratory tract. So we have that's why we use the shower in, shower out methods, changing of clothes, changing of boots, all those things that seem kind of tedious, but it really has a huge impact on our ability to keep those diseases out of the herd, because those diseases are very expensive to deal with. Yeah, I think the consumer should be pleased about the biosecurity level, because it does two things for them. It helps ensure that we have a good, healthy food source, because if we can keep the pigs healthier, obviously it's easier to produce good quality meat. And secondly, we do it efficiently, so that helps us to keep the overall food costs down, because we don't have to add additional costs to medicate the pigs that got sick, to recover them so that the meat would be of good quality. That's a lot of what I do. I mean, I do a lot of just herd preventative care and production. So when I'm walking through, barns full of pigs, my eyes looking at every pig in every pen when I go by, and I'm looking for pigs that are looking at me. They're curious, because by nature, a pig's a very curious animal. So even though they might initially be frightened, if I step into their pen, it won't take them long, and they're going to turn around and be curious and approach me. And they should have a good environment, appropriate temperature, appropriate space, so that they are free of respiratory diseases. They have room to move around, so they don't have any lameness. So I'm just looking for pigs that are curious and mobile, and free of any obvious health concerns.
The pork industry has been quick to adapt to a changing world, a trend that continues today.
Pork, I think pork has a pretty bright future because obviously the world population is growing, and pork is #1 meat in the world. It's third in the U.S. Behind chicken and beef in terms of consumption, but other areas of the world, pork is very popular meat of choice. And so I think through export markets and growth in the U.S. market, there's going to be a demand for pork. It's going to be a demand, obviously, for health and safety. I mean, people want food that they know is going to be safe for them to eat. They want lean meat that's going to be healthy for their body, low fat, low cholesterol. So, I mean, definitely pork is pushing to fit the bill on that. So I think as long as they keep pushing that way, there's going to be a demand for the product, and that's going to keep our pork producers in business.
That wraps it up for this episode of Real Ag. We hope the information presented here today gives you a better understanding of the pork industry. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, helping you sort the truth and helping you understand Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from Kansas Soybean Commission. The Soybean Checkoff. It works for everyone.